Is it a legit taxon or not? Let's get into Et2, Utetitan, and Alamosaurus and variation. That's probably the theme of this, other than the fact that I will try to control my frustrations. So what are we talking about here? The Alamosaurus sanjuanensis. Now, unfortunately for the world, in 1921, when it was thought the Earth was 100 million years old, we had no idea when the KT boundary or KPG boundary today existed, nor do we know how long species survive before they turn over. So you got to keep in mind the framework, the mentality of the paleontologists of the day. And Babe Ruth, the Sultan of Swing, was knocking them out of the park. Woohoo! President Harding was in the office, and we've got classic automobiles. You've got the flappers. The World War I is over. The economy's about to go into the roaring 20s. And with that background, dinosaur paleontology in the United States had been exploding. And we had late Cretaceous dinosaurs. We have tyrannosaurs, hadrosaurs, ceratopsians, some ankylosaurs and nodosaurs. Ornithomimids existed by then in 1921. Thescelosaurs, all in the Cretaceous, and pachycephalosaurs. However, the late Cretaceous 1921 scene was missing a very important group, near and dear to my heart. Where are the late Cretaceous North American sauropods? Now, they're all over the Jurassic West. They dominate the West. They are the keystones of museums at this point in time. The problem is, we don't have any in North America. This was perplexing to us. We're kind of a proud country. And they were in India with Titanosaur, the first, the name that was also named from scrap. We'll get to that someday. In Europe, you've got Hypsilosaurus and Apisaurus and Mercurosaurus. In South America, you have Argyrosaurus and Antarctosaurus. So you've got all of these very large titanosaur sauropods and a couple smaller ones. But the United States is lacking, and that's no good. And that is until June 1921. In this little red circle, somewhere in there in New Mexico, which was only a state 9 years prior, some large bones were found. And in a 1921 note to the magazine Science, Gilmore was able to describe them. And describe them he did in 1922. He described this. He put a photograph of USNM, United States National Museum, 10486. Now, I wish he had 86 this. I wish he hadn't done what he did. But he named this bone as the holotype of a new dinosaur called Alamosaurus from the Los Alamos Formation in New Mexico. And this is the only bone that's the holotype. And this bone is what I call, well, my dear friend Dr. Ray Wilhite calls these scrapula. And that's what we're looking at. He did give us a photo in 1920. That's a pretty big deal. And he puts an outline to where he thought it would have gone out in life. And a lot of these folks did this back then. They did as they thought they would be, not as they were. Something else philosophically you have to keep in mind when you're looking at something. Now, he justified its uniqueness by the following three characters. The gradual widening of the shaft from below to the superior end being much thinner. And much thinner, what he meant is much thinner than Camarasaurus. The superior end is flattened out convexly transverse. And that's in this middle section. And then no excavation or superior fossa, such as it found in so many sauropod scapula. Some pretty qualitative characters, but for 1922, we can let it pass. It was a different era. Oh, Charles, Chuck. Gilmore's a great scientist. I love his work. His Apatosaurus work was so ahead of its time. It's unfortunate it got undone, but wow, it's a different story. We'll skip that. We'll stay on target, which is he named a paratype, and he named the paratype this ischium that was found 200 feet away from the scapula. That's a pretty good distance. It's 10487. This is the same bone, looking at it from the outside and looking at it from inside the animal, so medial and lateral. And it's a right ischium, and it's a paratype. And it's in reasonably good shape, from what we can tell. It's got some breakage down here. He doesn't even try to guess how much was missing. What's interesting is this bone stumped him for quite a while. Ischia are super easy to identify in the Jurassic, but sauropod ischia in the Cretaceous, not so obvious. Regardless, he now has a sauropod, and he named it Alamosaurus sanjuanensis, and he's so excited, and he did it. Other people made mentions of it, and it was called a titanosaur of some sort, but he had checked the North American Late Cretaceous sauropod box, and Gilmore moved on. Dateline 1937, June, in Utah. The state hadn't been around, but what, got 41 years? When more big bones were found. And in 1938, again in Science, he put a little note that says, I'm going to describe these bones up in Utah. Now, Gilmore passed away September 27th, 1945. And I was worried that maybe I wasn't alive then, but I would have been worried that the paper wasn't going to be published. However, in 1946, it was published posthumously. And it was published along with Gorgosaurus lancensis, aka Nanotyrannus. Yeah, that. So Gilmore, controversy at the end. He just said, I don't care. Rip the Band-Aid off. Just like the Splendid Splinter was ripping home runs. Truman was the president in 1946. We've just gone through World War II. We're driving cool cars. The Earth is 3 billion years old based on some radiometric dates. And the Cretaceous Tertiary boundary is about 58 million years ago. We still don't know how long species live. Drive-ins were a thing, and big band swing was rocking and rolling. Well, no, it wasn't rocking and rolling. It was big banding and swinging. So, to put you in the orientation, in 1946, this beautiful paper comes out, and he back half of a skeleton. I have touched all these bones. He has 30 articulated caudal vertebrae with 25 articulated chevrons. In 1995, I pulled all these down. I photographed them, I measured them, I described them. Absolute treasure troves. And then I failed to publish on them, and that's on me. I should do that. He referenced an uncollectible sacrum, which we'll come back to. He found both ischia, which is cool because he had found an ischium on the original specimen. And he had a left scapulocoracoid. He found the right humerus radius ulna metacarpals, all together with both sternal plates and some rib fragments. This is a treasure trove if you're a sauropod researcher. I'm going to call Gilmore out because he wrote in his 1946 the following thing. It permits for the first time an adequate diagnosis of the genus Alamosaurus. That's my emphasis, but he knew his original paper was not adequate diagnosis. Later he goes on to write, the genus Alamosaurus was established on a meager specimen consisting of 2 bones, a left scapula and a right ischium, and somewhat incomplete, perhaps pertaining to 2 individuals. He writes this. He knew it. But then he says, the rather unusual procedure of founding a genus on such scanty evidence was justified on the ground that this was the first authentic record of the occurrence of sauropodous dinosaur remains in the Upper Cretaceous of North America. That's code for I wanted to name something and I wanted to be first. And that bothers me because he didn't need to name it. He just could have said we have a sauropod and let's wait for more stuff to be found. And then when this material was found, he could have named this material. But he didn't. He named a holotype on a variable character. Let's talk about variation. Now, what frustrates me is in 1946, after he's passed away, they gave us a drawing and not a photo. This is going to be important later. But it's irritating. It's also irritating the photo of that they did provide only as of this one view. We'll come back to that in a moment. But here they are side by side. This pencil drawing is of the Utah specimen. He decided that these were the exact same species. Keep in mind, they didn't have the same concept of deep time as we do today, nor the knowledge of species. So perhaps had he known more, he would have called it a different species at the very least. Either way, he called them the same species in the literature. Now I'm going to lay them over on top of each other. The blue outline here, I'm looking at my screen, is the 10486. That is the holotype. And the red outline is remainder of the Utah specimen. And notice how they don't overlap much at all. There's a lot of differences here. They're not the same width on the shaft. They're not as wide up in here. We're going to come back to that. I have some solutions to why the one in red is likely, much more likely to be the same animal if you look at it closely. So we'll come back to that because in a moment, actually we're not going to come back to that. Here's what I want to show why. here they are again. This is the 486 holotype, and this is the 15560 photos. This is a very solid bone. Now, scapulae are naturally curved in life. They're curved around the ribs, but they're almost always found crushed flat, and they're distorted. And they're ensconced in cartilage. They're quite variable. But what I want to point out to you is something. 10486, notice all of this white. This is the view we always see, and we always see it in black and white, and you can't tell. You're thinking, oh, they just filled in the cracks. No, this thing is splayed out. So if you actually look at the overlay, this red is splayed artificially. I'm convinced if you unsplay it, this sprawl at this end goes away. That variability leaves. The problem is the author of the 2025 paper intentionally used outlines. And by using outlines, what I call the trouble with scribbles is you don't capture taphonomy. If you don't go and touch the bones yourself, and I've touched these bones, granted 1995, a long time ago, but you don't get an appreciation for the amount of distortion present. And so overlaying these bones, you can see that that distortion may be because of the crushing and nature of the holotype specimen. Now I want to bring some variation into play. This here are two scapulae from the Mygap-Moore quarry of Apatosaurus. We know they're both apatosaurs. They're both roughly the same size, and they are wildly different morphology. Look at how wide this one is at the bottom in blue, but how tiny the head is compared to the red one's head. That is very different morphology, quite different. In fact, let's put them side by side. If we know that this is splayed out over here, we can make this not as drastic. Compared to that, even leaving them as they are, I would say the variation in the Apatosaurus is greater. I certainly wouldn't call these two different genera, which is what has been done in 2025. Now, when I was talking about the scapulae are curved, this is two, a left and a right from the same individual. And you can see they're beautifully preserved. Their curvatures are kept. But you don't have the same curvature even. Look at the difference. The heads are different. The angles of curvature are different. We're talking very different. If you look at it in cross-section here, you have subcircular versus rectangular. You wouldn't even score these the same code, but they're in the same specimen. And then here we have a left and a right, and you can see the shafts are the same, but this one out here has some deformation or some variation. It's different, but they're the left and a right. And then the coracoid. These coracoids are from the left and the right of the same individual animal. And what do you see here? Some wild differences if you make the whole the center point. No matter how you try to match this, you can't make them match. Now, variation in scapulae, here's a left and a right of Supersaurus. And what you're not able to see is how badly the down one is. It's 10 inches long, and that's because this whole end down here has so much plaster in it. But they're not the same size. Even if you remove all the cracks and gaps, one is going to be longer than the other. Heck, if you look at me, my left shoulder and right shoulder, they're different. They're sloped down. Bilateral symmetry is great, but we have variation from one side of the body to the other. Now, as we move along into the variation side, we'll go back to how this variation, this white plaster here, this tells me 100% this is blown out and splayed. If you only go off outlines, you're failing to capture the taphonomic variation that's present. Same with the Supersaurus scapulae. Same with all of these scapulae. If you lay these drawings across one another, you are going to think you have different taxa. Let's look at some modern animals. This is a coracoid of an alligator, wild-sourced alligators. If you use this common point here, very different morphology. More different, I would say, than what you have between the New Mexico Alamosaurus and the Utah Alamosaurus. So I'm going to ask that you never ever use a girdle as a sauropod holotype. Please don't, please don't, please don't. Never use girdles as your holotype in a sauropod. Ever, ever, ever. Never. All right, here's another problem with outlines and variation. So this bone right here, I saw this at the Perot Museum. I was with Dr. Christy Lopez and Dr. Ron Tykowski. We were just finished a productive day working on Alamosaurus material, and we're about to go catch a flight and we're walking a different path, and I'm peering as I always do, and I stop and really train wrecked. Everyone runs into each other. It's like a comedy because I saw this bone. Now, this bone was tucked back up underneath a shelf, and I saw this narrow waist, and I thought to myself, I have found the first non-Alamosaurus femur from the Maastrichtian of Texas, the Late Cretaceous. I was so excited. And here's why, because here's what a Diplodocus femur looks like. Generically, that's pretty darn similar, right? And I was so stoked. But we had to leave. I couldn't pull it out. We just ran out of time. It's always the case. So we come back a few months later because I can't let this rest. I show this to all the Sauro squad, to lots of people. Everyone's like, yeah, good job, Brian. You found it. You should write this up. And I was super excited to publish on it. But I went back because you always call it research to search again. And what did I find? I pulled this bone out and I found this is all plaster. If I took an outline of this, I would have a Diplodocid in the Late Cretaceous. Unfortunately, what I have is I have the head of the femur and the distal end of a femur, and someone just built a connection. There might be some bone under there. It's impossible to say, but they didn't try to match the sides. Part 2, if you're using outlines, if you don't know the angle, this is parallax. Look how Diplodocid this is. That's because this is pointed at an angle where that back end is narrower and farther away. This is not a true orthogonal shot. You lose a ton of information, but you wouldn't know that if I didn't tell you in the paper. And my frustration with illustrations across all papers is just that. No one tells you this kind of information, and it's really important to know. So we've addressed variation, and I want to show you something else. The ICZN, because I want to just complete something here. Paratypes have no name-fixing function. Article 72, Article 61.1.2, and Article 75.1 are extremely clear. Paratypes have no name value. So the fact that Gilmore named a paratype was this issue causes us problems because the holotype's not lost. And if he had made this, so we can't do a neotype just like that. If he had made this part of the paratype or the holotype, we could at least say he put them together and we would have 2 bones to work with. But he didn't. So even though this is the paratype and that sounds cool, all that means is, hey, I was found at the holotype quarry. Look at me. And that's it. Now, Texas, New Mexico, Utah, even Arizona, we've all gotten in on the Alamosaurus Late Cretaceous Titanosaur Act. And people have been publishing these since the 80s. But no one has named anything new, and that's because the holotype is a scapula. So in order to feel ethical about naming it, I would want to compare it to the scapula. And because the scapular variable, you're going to have a big burden of proof to make something new. So let's look at the only scapulae that I could find in collections across the southwestern United States. Here you have the Utah specimen, you have the holotype here, and then you have this one, which is from New Mexico. That has a straight line like the holotype, and it's seemingly similar. So you can't name that a new genus. And then whatever's going on here at the Texas Memorial Museum out in Austin, I don't know if I would use this to name anything. I certainly wouldn't, actually. So here are the 4 scapulae of Late Cretaceous North American titanosaurs, or sauropods for that matter. Here's where it gets sad. We have multiple ischia. You can see here, you've got ischia. You've got 5 ischia on this page. You've got this one, which is from Utah. And here's the holotype. And then here are 3 others. And you can see they don't look the same. There is clearly something going on in the Late Cretaceous sauropods, in the ischia. And these other elements have been found. We found caudal vertebrae with the holotype. There are other elements of caudals and dorsals. The cervical series, I'm surprised it wasn't named. Many people would have named this a new genus. But all it is cervical vertebrae. This beautiful dorsal vertebra, you could have named it a genus. Got lots of characters, but what are you going to name it against? You can't compare it to the holotype, so this could belong to the holotype. In 2017, I almost named the Utah material a new genus. I went down this path. I thought long and hard about naming it. I got involved because Gilmore referenced there was a sacrum that wasn't collected, and Jensen in his letters, when I was reading them, noted that he went to try to recover it, and he found the brown stain. It's a great little short note. He had Gilmore's illustration from 46, and he's looking at the photo of the location. The problem is he can't find it. He knows it's close. And after a couple hours of kicking around in the heat, frustrated and irritated, he was an artist. And Jensen thought, well, wait, maybe they flipped it. They reversed the negative. And he turns it around and holds it up. And sure enough, he walked right to the locality. How cool is that? And he found the brown spot. Yeah, this was not collectible. But in his walkings, he went to the other side of the holotype hill and found a humerus and a femur head plus some caudal vertebrae. And I described those. And I spent a lot of time looking at the holotype material. And I thought, the holotype's terrible. We could rename this something new. I thought about just calling it Alamosaurus new species, like Utetitan or something simple. And I thought about moving it as a neotype. But in order to move it as a neotype to be official, you have to go through a ton of self-appointed watchdog group, the ICZN, or International Code of Zoological Nomenclature. It could take 5 to 15 years. I have to get a unanimous vote of approval. It's a giant frustration that I don't think needs to be done in this case. We could have just moved it. But I didn't. I took the simple way out, like every researcher had done until 2025, and acknowledged the following. Alamosaurus is a construct that tells us a late Cretaceous sauropod existed in southwestern United States. And we call it Alamosaurus, but we suspect there's multiple taxa present, but because the genus is named from a scapula and one bone only, we need a scapula to override that. And we hadn't found it, and we haven't found it, in my opinion, yet. So do I think the Utah specimen is different from the one down in New Mexico? In all likelihood, yes. But I can't prove it with the evidence science requires. And certainly I won't use outlines when the time comes to prove it. Everyone has kept Alamosaurus as a valid genus, with all taxa as convenience. We don't have the smoking gun. The rough run specimen is the most likely to be different, but at that scapula you can't do anything with. So what happened in 2025 is the Utah material was given a new name based off of this figure here. And this is the figure 1. That's what we got. That's what we have to work with. So I went ahead and I laid over what we should have gotten, which were photos. And right away, you can tell that there's some deformation here. So this photo in the middle of the holotype makes me dubious. You can't trust that outline, especially since we saw the other side and know how much restoration is here. This paper is loaded with errors. I have more than 50 errors. If you check out my blog, I labeled them all. Typos, errors of fact, like he says it's found 300 feet away, the paratype from the holotype. He puts Arizona in places that it shouldn't be in geological formations. So many basic errors. It's frustrating. I don't know how it got published. And I hate saying that because I don't necessarily disagree with the conclusion. But how you get there by scribbling is not the way. I couldn't match all of his figures. I followed to a T his descriptors. And all of his descriptors led me to things like this. He put anterior versus posterior. I still can't figure out what he did down here. And he did write me a note stating that he felt I maligned and misrepresented him. I don't think I did. I followed everything he said. And if you follow it to the letter of the law, this is what I got. Could I have made a mistake? We can make a mistake. But I stand by this chart, and I stand by the fact that when you have outlines of highly variable elements, all you're doing is setting yourself up for failure because you're not taking apart taphonomic variation on top of ontogenetic variation, on top of individual variation on one of the most variable bones in a sauropod's body, like we've already looked at. So let's go over the characters that were used to bring this beast back. And you're going to note something. I'm going to underline everything important in red. Strongly prominent. I don't know what that means. Strongly sinuous. So a prominent triangular glenoid. What is that? What is strongly and prominent? There's no metrics there. Fairly prominent, widely separated. Maybe. I know this is a character others have keyed in on, but I'm not sure how valuable that is considering the variation. More prominent. The last of the scapula characters. Okay, versus what? Give me some examples of less prominent. Now you get to the ischium. Remember, that's a paratype, so we don't care about it. But The lateral process is modest in size. What does that mean? The posterolateral profile of the ischium is moderately concave arced. What does that even mean? I don't know. And the one that truly blew my mind is there's no femur with the holotype. And he wrote femur robust. That's sick. That's what he wrote, question mark. So are you asking if the femur is robust? Are you allowed to put a guesswork character in? The problem is the ICZN doesn't care. It's like a honey badger. He gave characters. It's part of a specimen that is in a repository, which, by the way, to the ICZN, the closet behind me, if I called it a collection, is officially okay. They don't care about it being publicly accessible. As long as it's in a collection with a specimen number, with characters, that's it. They don't get into the ethics. They're mechanical. So what this person has done is taken a specimen from Utah and now prevented it from being the neotype of Alamosaurus. Completely remove that possibility off the table. 0 quantitative characters and 0 characters for the rest of the skeleton. And I know his thought was, well, the holotype is a scapula, so I'm just going to use scapular characters. And the paratype's an ischium, and maybe he forgot it has no value, and we don't even know if it goes to that individual. But if you're naming a new taxon, please, 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 why wouldn't you name characters from the tail and the forelimb? Because we have elements from the tail. We have elements from the forelimb in collections all across the southwestern United States and in parts elsewhere. Super convenient if we had listed a number of characters that go with the Utah specimen. Here's your golden chance. But he chose not to. He chose to use an outline, and he chose to use qualitative characters. Now, the other big character that he used was the geology. He claimed that the Ojo Alamo Formation was a different age from the North Horn Formation. Unfortunately, literally weeks after this paper came out, Flynn et al. In 2025 produce, boom, they're actually equivalent. So your age argument, which is never a good one, is completely removed as well, assuming Flynn's right. He's a pretty solid geologist. So as a result, we're using characters that are extremely qualitative on a bone that is highly, highly, highly variable. So it's frustrating. So what do we do? What do we do about this? Now, the ICZN says you can't use it as a neotype. What in my mind should have happened was this was a null hypothesis, was there's one Late Cretaceous North American sauropod. Go prove to me there's 2. Both peer reviewers have come forward publicly saying they disagreed with the paper as it was and it should not have been submitted. It is extremely rare when peer reviewers raise their hand and share their peer review and say, these are all the reasons why this should not have happened. But why are names important? Why do we even care that we're naming this Utah Titan or Utetitan? I asked him how to say it, and he didn't tell me and just said it's named after the Aboriginal people. My physical anthropology days would cringe at that. They would be Indigenous or Native American. The Aboriginal term, in my mind, works for Australia. Neither here nor there. The reality is you use names to allow stable conversations with scientific issues. Names are purely artificial. But the taxonomic codes maintain stability, so names are useful when we're talking about things. Biogeography, phylogeny, and cladistics. The challenge is, when we name things, we have to use fossils to have the names hung on to, the holotype. And they're rarely complete. Now, Gilmore did us dirty and picked one of the worst bones to have used. But even if you use better material, we find out that what was thought to be diagnostic, I'm looking at you, Allosaurus and Camarasaurus, turn out to be holes in all the animals that are their cousins, not useful tomorrow. Or we find new specimens that overturn what we found. So, frustration set up all around. What should have happened is all diagnoses of new taxa have to be explicitly defined with repeatable character states, ratios, metrics that are quantitative, that are cognizant of variation. Variation in sauropods is known. Why you wouldn't consider that is beyond me. Please, photos, videos, CT scans, 3D-based documentation of holotype critical elements has to be there. Leverage YouTube and upload your conversation about why you're scoring the characters. Let's embrace technology. We're in 2026. Everything is fast and size is almost irrelevant. Plus, use direct evaluation, what Ray Wilhite and I call our DICE score, distortion index and completeness index. Note what's restored. Note what's deformed. Note what's missing. You got to do this because you end up doing what happened today. Now, there's been all kinds of stones thrown at this. And I'm saying, hold on. As frustrating as this is, you can't ignore it. It's published. It's in the literature. I guess you can ignore it and just say no. Or you can say contra, and that's fine. It cites and acknowledges you knew it existed. But here's my take. I was going to do this in 2017. I wasn't going to call it a new genus. I was going to call it a new species. I don't disagree. I mean, he's probably right. We're comparing a scapula to a scapula. But we don't know. And we're supposed to be, what's more parsimonious? A variable character is similar to another variable character, so we keep the genus name the same? I think that's a good move. Naming it a new species was fine. Naming it a new genus and new species, that's tough. So the real answer is we need to keep looking. We need to keep finding other material. Now, you can stop there, but I don't think you want to. I think you're going to want to see this next part because this is a teaser into some of the things I'm working on in the big picture. We talk about variation, and here's my trouble with scribbles and why papers relying on drawings should not be viewed with the same level of acceptance in the academic community. Cope drew one of these figures. Osborne and Mook drew the other. Notice they are almost identical in some areas and not even close in others. This is the same bone, drawn decades apart. Cope drew this illustration, and he drew these beautiful laminae in here. He made the centrum look beautiful. Daniel Vidal scanned the bone, and when you overlay them, it really brings home the fact that Cope and Marsh, especially, and his Marsh plates you can't trust, they drew them as they felt the bones should be, not as the bones actually are. And recently I had a very animated exchange on this topic at a conference because someone said, well, that's okay. It is okay if you declare it. But Williston did not declare, this is his holotype, here's this white one. He drew his holotype of Linoceros. And I assume that's what it looked like. And then these other folks, Francasso, drew his version of it. If you lay it on top of each other, they don't match. It's the same bone. Berman took a photograph, and that's his grayed out area in the back. You can't get it to match because it's distorted. It's in multiple pieces. As you can see here, De Braga drew it in multiple pieces. And then I took this photograph here, which is pretty similar, but not identical because I couldn't get the same angle as Berman, and comparing it to Williston. So Williston drew Linoceros as he thought it would have been in life and made lots of statements based off of that, and other authors made statements based off of that. The problem is that was not declared anywhere. He didn't tell anyone. So Williston did everyone dirty, but by the time of the day, I guess it was okay, and people just assumed everything was drawn the way you think it should look. So how do you score this? I mean, if you lay these over, the sutures don't even match. Look at that. That one's moved to the left. That was moved to the right. You then wonder, well, was it printed backwards? I don't know. What I can tell you is it's not just him. In the early days, in the 1900s, here is Thomas Carr with Nanotyrannus. What he did when he was naming it as Teenage Cheese Rex, the dark brown here in the back, that's a photo of as it exists, and here's his restoration. I chose this as the common point. He extended the nose. And he says it's an interpretation, but he doesn't tell you how much of an interpretation. This is massive interpretation. And this in 1999, well, this is one of the impetus for why you had so many people fighting against Nanotyrannus. Look at the side view. I laid CT scans over Carr's picture, and I took 3 different points. You can see the CT here. I can't get him in lateral view to match because he changed the lateral view as well. He modified it to be, in my opinion, more Rex-like than it actually was. I doubt the artist ever knew of this level, or maybe he did and was paid to just look the other way. I don't know. Now, if you look at Draco Rex, here's another great example. If you look at Bacher in his own paper, I took a photo of the holotype, but I took his picture and I overlaid his drawing. and I can't match it. It's terrible. Then I took Goodwin and their illustration, and I can't line it up against Bacher's photo. I then took Goodwin and Evans, and I laid their drawing against Horner and Goodwin's drawing, and again, I can't get them to match. These are illustrations, and they're photos. And then I took my photo, and I put it up against the photos that have done before, and as you see, there's multiple horns. Nothing matches. This is insanity. So if you're trying to score this, which one do you go with if you're using ratios or proportions? You can't trust anything. I'm sorry to say that, but we have so much variation going on in the dino world today that it's very sad and very disappointing, and it's quite frustrating at the end to see all of this variation. And I think part of it is anatomists, they only get one cadaver. And unless you teach anatomy, you might get 2 or 3 cadavers over your career. And unless you go into teaching anatomy, you don't get a grasp of variation. They don't teach it in school. And the only way you start picking up on variation is by going to museums and touching specimens, which cost time and money. So you rely on these in the literature. That's why we put them out there. But what I have learned in my gray-haired 30-some years since 1992 doing this is you can't trust anything. You've got to know that if you're working straight from the literature, if you're scoring from the literature, it's the best you can do on one hand, but you have to be able to flag, I personally touched this character. And then if the museums, they're dangerous because they mount sauropods, and in order to mount them, they restore them so they look good, and then they paint them, and usually the paint matches all of it matches together so you can't tell what's original. And they don't take the time to CT scan them, and they don't take the time to surface scan all the bones. And if they do surface scan, you also want a real nice high-res video so you can try to tell what's original and what's not. The end result is museums mount original specimens, and it's no different than putting them behind in someone's house, because now you can't study them properly. And that is a travesty. So everyone says it belongs in a museum with an asterisk. If the museum agrees to lay the material out at the bottom of the exhibit with a dynamic exhibit on top, sure. Then I can study the bones and everyone can see what they look like. But if the museum is mounting original bone, if they're not doing all of the CT and other work ahead of time, then that's lost to science. And that's criminal. And that's no different than selling it to privately. That is now a marketing piece designed to bring people in to look at our great Apatosaurus, look at our huge sauropod. That's going to bring all the eyes in, and you're going to pay money to see that. It is not for science. It's to generate revenue. It's almost like it becomes the football program. It's no longer academically minded. It's commercially minded. They sacrifice one for the many. Now, that's pretty editorialized there. All right. I'm Dr. Brian Curtis with Fossil Crates, saying, check out my book, check out my website. I co-authored it with Colin Poivert. It's a fun book. If you don't have it, signed copies are available on our website. Please like and subscribe to our channels of our social media. I'm trying to share more and cool facts. I respond to all the comments myself. I'm Dr. Brian Curtis saying thank you kindly. Adios.